All right, so you sent us this really fascinating case about a murder that happened out in Joshua Tree National Park. And looking over all this material, I gotta say, this one is gonna be a wild ride. We're gonna dive deep into all the twists and turns of this case. We're talking about the death of a man named Henry Stain.
Yeah.
His life ended tragically in this really stark and beautiful landscape. So what exactly happened to Henry? What role did this harsh environment and these, I guess, even harsher relationships play in his death? It all starts with a seemingly ordinary hike. You know, one of those hikes that takes a very dark turn.
Right. So picture this. You're out hiking, enjoying the desert, maybe snapping some photos, and you see a group of vultures circling overhead. Pretty normal, right?
Yeah.
You'd probably assume they're scavenging on some unfortunate desert creature. But what if those vultures are circling something a lot more sinister?
Well, that's exactly what happened to a hiker named Mark Powers. He was out there, he saw those vultures, snapped a few pictures, didn't think anything of it at the time. But it wasn't until later when he was going through those pictures with his wife that they realized those vultures weren't circling some roadkill.
No, those photos, they actually captured a chilling scene. They captured a partially buried human body. The fact that it was so remote and they tried to conceal the body, that immediately points to foul play, right? And the seed of decomposition that suggests that the body had been out there for a while just makes the mystery even deeper.
Deeper and deeper. So authorities, they identified the victim pretty quickly as Henry Allen Stain. And that's when this investigation really kicks into high gear. What they find in Henry's garage is shocking. I mean, it really points to this brutal and personal attack. There was blood everywhere, spattered on the walls, pooled on the floor. It was a bloodbath. And just the sheer violence of it all points to a deep-seated rage.
Yeah, and there were signs of a struggle too. Drag marks, furniture overturned. Clearly this wasn't quick. It wasn't a clean killing at all. This was a prolonged and very violent assault.
But there's this strange detail. No sign of forced entry.
Right.
Seems like the attacker knew Henry. Maybe Henry even let him into the house.
Yeah, and here's another thing. The security DVR system. Ripped out. Someone went to a lot of trouble to try and cover up this crime. This wasn't something that just happened in the heat of the moment. This was planned.
Wow. So who was this Henry Stain, and what could have led to such a brutal end? Well, for starters, he was in the middle of a really messy separation from his wife, Melissa. They were battling over the custody of their kids. There were allegations of domestic violence. It was just this really volatile situation.
Yeah, it's definitely the kind of situation that can, lead to resentment, volatility, and a lot of conflict. And to make matters worse, Henry was also dealing with an opioid addiction, a problem that stemmed from a car accident and, only got worse during his divorce.
It sounds like his life was this mix of personal struggles and really strained relationships.
Yeah.
A picture of a man really battling his own demons. But even with all that turmoil, there was one constant in Henry's life that seemed to offer him some peace: his ham radio. He was an avid enthusiast, part of this close-knit community of other operators.
For people who might not be familiar with ham radio, it's a hobby that uses, amateur radio equipment. You can communicate with other operators, sometimes all around the world. It's a way to connect with people who are passionate about technology and radio communication.
And it's actually through those radio waves that investigators found a crucial clue. Henry's last transmission before he disappeared mentioned a name. He mentioned Ashley.
That little detail was a huge breakthrough for the investigators. Not only did it give them a possible time frame for the crime, but it also gave them a brand new person of interest to look into: Ashley.
And as investigators start to dig into Ashley Stap, they uncover this tangled web of relationships that just add another layer of intrigue to this whole case. Ashley, she's 27 years old. She had this unusual relationship with Henry. I mean, they met through Craigslist.
Of all places.
Of all places. But there's a twist. She's also involved with another man, a U.S. Marine lieutenant named Curtis Crew.
So now we have a love triangle. The possibility for jealousy, possessiveness, rage. The big question is, was Ashley just a witness to Henry's death? Or was she more involved than that?
And then investigators find something else, like a gold mine of digital evidence. Cell phone records. These records actually put Curtis at Henry's house on the very same day Henry disappeared. And when they trace Curtis's phone's movements, they uncover a really disturbing pattern.
Yeah, that phone, it traveled between Henry's house, Ashley's mother's house, and then finally to that remote spot in Joshua Tree where they found Henry's body.
So they have a potential motive: jealousy. They have digital evidence placing Curtis at all the key locations. With all this, the authorities decide to arrest both Curtis and Ashley.
But this case, this case is far from over. There are going to be some twists and turns ahead that are going to really challenge their assumptions and complicate this search for justice. So Curtis and Ashley are under arrest. That seems like a pretty big win for the investigation, right? But like I said, this case, it's not even close to being closed. Remember, we've got this really complex web of relationships and motives, and the truth, well, it's going to take some unexpected turns.
Yeah, it really is like peeling back the layers of an onion, isn't it?
Yeah.
Every time we get a new piece of information, it just reveals another layer of complexity to this whole thing. So what happened after they were arrested? Did they confess to anything? Did they try and blame each other?
Well, the authorities decided to take things a step further when they actually wiretapped their phone calls.
Wow.
Yeah, and it gave them this sort of window into their private conversations, their anxieties, their attempts to like cover their tracks.
So what were they saying? Was there any talk about being worried about getting caught? Or any like signs of guilt?
Oh, definitely some worry. And they were definitely trying to make sure their stories matched up. They talked about what they'd say to the police if they were questioned and whether or not anyone had seen them at Henry's house.
So it sounds like they were trying to like create this united front.
Exactly. But here's the thing. Despite what seemed like a pretty solid case, they had the phone records, the wiretaps. The DA decided to drop all charges against both Curtis and Ashley.
Right. They just dropped the charges. I mean, after all that evidence, that's a huge twist. Why would they do that?
It is pretty confusing. It's possible they weren't sure they could use the wiretap recordings, or maybe they needed more time to make their case even stronger to really make sure they'd get a conviction.
Yeah. Okay, so back to square one then. So what happened next? Did Curtis and Ashley just try and go back to their lives, pretend like none of this ever happened?
Not exactly. Ashley kind of disappeared. But Curtis, he stayed on the investigators' radar. They weren't convinced he was innocent, and they kept digging.
Determined to get to the bottom of it.
Right. And the deeper they went into Curtis's life, the more they found. This tough Marine had a dark side. Turns out, he was really possessive and controlling, especially in his relationship with Ashley.
So this love triangle we talked about, it might be even more messed up than we originally thought.
Oh, for sure. They found all these notes Curtis had been keeping, like detailed logs of everything Ashley did. He was tracking her phone calls when she went out, even like little things he thought she was doing. It was like he needed to know everything about what she was up to.
Those notes sound really creepy, like he was obsessed with controlling her.
Totally. And this controlling behavior, it wasn't just notes. Turns out a few months before Henry was killed, Curtis had actually attacked him with a hammer.
So this wasn't just some, one-time thing.
Right.
This guy had a history of violence.
Exactly. It adds this whole other layer to the case. Curtis's jealousy and possessiveness, they had been building for a while, and he'd already shown that he was capable of violence.
That must have been a huge break in the case for the prosecution. Shows a pattern of violence and a direct connection between Curtis's jealousy and his willingness to, attack someone.
Absolutely. And with this new information, they went and arrested Curtis again. This time, they charged him with murder.
But Ashley, what happened to her? Where'd she go? And what was her role in all this? Did they bring any charges against her?
That's where the story takes another turn. They did find Ashley eventually, but they didn't charge her with murder.
So what did they get her for then? Was she like an accomplice, or did they consider her involvement less serious?
It seems like the prosecution knew she had valuable information about what happened to Henry. So they offered her a deal, testify, tell the truth about everything that happened, and she could avoid more serious charges.
Right, it happens all the time. To get someone convicted, they need someone else to cooperate and tell their story.
Exactly. Ashley, she took the deal and agreed to tell them what really happened the night Henry died. Her testimony was going to be a crucial piece of the puzzle, shedding light on everything leading up to the murder and revealing the dark secrets hidden beneath these tangled relationships.
So now Curtis is on trial for murder. Ashley's agreed to testify. But they're both telling very different stories. It's like a classic courtroom drama, both sides giving their versions of events. It's up to the jury to figure out who's telling the truth.
And the truth, well, it's far from clear-cut.
So here we are. Curtis is on trial. Ashley's agreed to testify against him. But they're telling two completely different stories. I mean, the tension in that courtroom must have been palpable. What was it like in there?
Oh, you could have cut the tension with a knife. On one side, you've got the prosecution laying out all their evidence. They've got the blood stains from Henry's garage, the notes Curtis kept on Ashley, and of course the cell phone data that puts him right at the scene of the crime.
It sounds like they had a pretty strong case. Did they play the recordings of Curtis and Ashley talking about the murder? You know, those wiretapped conversations?
They did. Those recordings were huge. The jury got to hear Curtis and Ashley's own words, talking about how worried they were about getting caught,
Yeah.
trying to get their story straight. Hearing those voices, that fear and desperation in that courtroom must have been chilling.
And through it all, Curtis is saying he's innocent, right? He's claiming self-defense, saying Henry attacked him first. Did the jury buy it?
That's when things get really interesting.
Yeah.
Ashley's testimony, it was a game changer. She told this totally different story about that night. She described Curtis as this jealous and enraged man.
So she's directly contradicting Curtis's version of events.
Exactly. She's saying Curtis was the one who attacked Henry, that it was all fueled by his jealousy. Did she get into the specifics of the attack?
She did. Ashley testified that Curtis just snapped, that he attacked Henry in the garage. It was brutal. She talked about the violence, the struggle, Henry begging for his life. It must have been so hard for her to talk about all of that. I mean, she was part of the cover-up. Her choices led to this tragedy. Did she seem remorseful?
Oh, absolutely. She broke down on the stand, admitted she lied to protect Curtis and that her lies had these horrible consequences. You could tell she felt awful about what had happened. I think that really resonated with the jury.
So you've got Curtis saying it was self-defense, Ashley saying he was a violent, jealous attacker. Two completely opposite stories. What convinced the jury?
I think of the mountain of evidence the prosecution had. They really connected the dots. The physical evidence, the phone records, Ashley's testimony, it all pointed to Curtis being guilty.
So after all that, what did the jury decide?
After deliberating for a few days, they found Curtis Crew guilty of second-degree murder. They didn't buy the self-defense argument. They believed he killed Henry out of rage and jealousy.
Guilty of second-degree murder. So, not premeditated. What are the assault charge? The attack with the hammer.
Guilty on that one, too. The fact that he'd been violent before and the way he was so controlling, I think that helped convince the jury that this wasn't just a one-time thing.
So two guilty verdicts. What was the sentence?
Curtis got 15 years to life for the murder of Henry Stain. They had another 3 years for the assault. It was a heavy sentence, but it shows just how serious his crimes were and how much they affected Henry's family.
Did Henry's family get to say anything at the sentencing?
Yeah, they did. His mother and sister gave these incredibly powerful statements. You could hear their grief, their anger, just this profound sense of loss. Talking about how horrific it was to know how Henry died, how his life was cut so short.
I can't even imagine what they went through. From Henry going missing to sitting through that trial. Did Curtis say anything?
He did. He said he was sorry, that he regretted what he'd done. But I don't think Henry's family found much comfort in his words.
What about Ashley? What happened to her?
Well, as part of her plea deal, she got probation, and she has to go to a rehab program for substance abuse. It was a much lighter sentence. A lot of people, especially Henry's family, felt like she didn't really face the consequences of her actions.
So Curtis is going to be in prison for a long time. Ashley gets a second chance. It's hard, isn't it? The justice system tries to be fair, but it's not always perfect.
It's true. And this case, with everything that happened, it really shows you how complex relationships can be, how dangerous jealousy and possessiveness can be, and how much damage violence can do. It's a story that makes you think, about how fragile life is and how important it is to ask for help when you're struggling with those kinds of dark emotions.
Yeah, this has been a really intense deep dive. I feel for Henry and his family, and it really makes you think about how crucial it is to be honest with each other in relationships, to set boundaries. We've seen the dark side of humanity in this case, but we've also seen the incredible strength people can have when they're dealing with unimaginable loss.
A powerful reminder for all of us.
Thank you for joining us as we've explored this really complicated and tragic case. We'll be back soon with another deep dive, taking a look at something new and unpacking more stories that help us understand the world around us. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and we'll see you next time.